But we begin tonight with just 19 days to go before the election, with voting already underway in multiple states. And after weeks of Donald Trump and his MAGA minions screaming that Vice President Kamala Harris can't handle tough interviews and is hiding from the press, the VP walked into their house and proved them wrong, handling a very contentious interview with Fox's 1950s send-up supposed straight news guy, Bret Baier. And in addition to proving that she can take tough, sometimes belligerent questions, Harris did a service for those of us on Earth One, exposing how the right-wing media machine works to protect Donald Trump at all costs, to maintain the fiction that he is normal and stable and not senile or dangerous, that he's still the character from The Apprentice and not the sundowning 78-year-old wannabe dictator that those of us on Earth One see every day. The hosts on Fox, especially in prime time, don't expose their viewers to the unhinged, diminished, real Donald Trump. Instead, their viewers see a completely different, carefully edited, sane-washed Earth 2 Trump. But last night, Kamala Harris pierced through the veil to give Fox viewers a glimpse of reality. Check out this moment when Harris exposed Fox's cynical editing tactics as she brought up Trump's recent comments about sicking the military on, quote, the enemy within.
He's the one who talks about an enemy within, an enemy within, talking about the American people, suggesting he would turn the American military on the American people.
We asked that question to the former president today. Harris Faulkner had a town hall, and this is how he responded.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
So,
Brett, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
Busted. For the record, the vice president is correct. Here is the full bite from that Trump interview.
It is the enemy from within, and they're very dangerous. They're Marxists and communists and fascists, and they're sick. I use a guy like Adam Schiff because they made up the Russia hoax. It took 2 years to solve the problem. Absolutely nothing was done wrong, et cetera, et cetera. They're dangerous for our country. We have China, we have Russia, we have all these countries. If you have a smart president, they can all be handled. The more difficult are, the Pelosi's, these people, they're so sick. And they're so evil. If they would spend their time trying to make America great again, it would be so easy to make this country great. But when I heard about that, they were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening.
You see what they did there? Cut out that last most important bit. Now, there was another moment during the interview where Baier literally just played one of Trump's campaign ads and asked Harris to respond to it. Imagine getting an opportunity to interview a presidential candidate 3 weeks from an election, and you use that valuable time to play their opponent's commercial for them for free. And you need to understand that this is what is happening all the time on Fox, especially for prime time. Their viewers are being fed a false reality. In fact, it's probably the first time a lot of Fox viewers heard that former members of Trump's administration, including General Mark Milley, have called him dangerous, unstable, and unfit. Or the scores of economists who say Harris's plan would improve the economy while Trump's will cause inflation and a recession. She even said point blank, my presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's, which is one of Trump's favorite talking points. But that's probably one of the reasons that Harris did the interview, to show independents and Nikki Haley voters that she's not the weak and dumb caricature Donald Trump has created of her. She's strong and capable and not afraid of right-wing media. Last night was also a light bulb moment that brought me back to this moment from 3 days ago, when we all watched Trump awkwardly swaying to songs like Nothing Compares to You and Hallelujah for nearly 40 minutes at a Pennsylvania town hall. But what was happening before this senior moment? is that he actually took 5 questions from an audience members. And even in a room full of supporters, it wasn't going too well. He gave long, rambly answers, talked about Hannibal Lecter when asked about inflation, and even told everyone to go vote on January 5th, as per usual. So, it's not totally out of the realm of possibility that he took a handful of questions, realized he couldn't handle it, and just decided to bail and instead just burn 40 minutes zoning out and playing some of his favorite tunes. And it seems like he and his team are somewhat aware that he's struggling. I mean, it would probably explain, right, why he's backed out of numerous interviews this month alone. First 60 Minutes, then CNBC's Squawk Box, and just today, the NRA canceled an event where he was set to be the keynote speaker due to, quote, campaign scheduling changes. And CNN's Brian Stelter is reporting that he also backed out of another interview that was in the works with NBC News on the economy. Because unlike Vice President Harris last night, he's incapable of taking hard questions. Most days, he can't even give a coherent answer to softballs, even at a friendly town hall. In fact, Donald Trump seems to believe that he is under no obligation to face any questions, even if they come on friendly territory. Like his appearance at the Economic Club of Chicago, where he imploded after being asked about one of his pet issues, tariffs. And today, he retreated to one of his safe spaces, an interview with a Manosphere podcast host. Trump claimed that he was hoodwinked into an interview with Bloomberg's editor-in-chief and wasn't happy about it because he said he thought he was just supposed to show up and give a speech. The reality is, this increasingly decompensating candidate will only go where he's coddled by the crowd, like his town hall with Fox, aired yesterday with the benefit of being taped a day earlier, with an all-woman audience that was stacked with pro-Trump Republicans, something that was pretty evident from the start. And when he was asked to respond to his own remarks, calling Democrats the enemy within.
The Republican nominee for this year's presidential election, Donald J. Trump. Welcome. Mr. President, Kamala Harris has said you sounded unhinged and unchecked power is in our future. What do you say about that?
I thought it was a nice presentation. I wasn't unhinged.
But even faced with friendly fire, he once again simply weaved in the face of questions, especially on the economy.
But what kind of realistic changes that do you think you can provide single parents, married parents, any kind of parent to just simply afford children in today's world with the way things are?
Right? It is not fair.
No.
You never heard of Ivanka, right?
So what happens to the economy such that people can afford bacon that's gone up 28% in cost? Like, what do we do?
So I feel so badly about what's happened because none of this would have happened. Just to start, there wouldn't have been a war in Ukraine and Russia. There wouldn't have been an October 7th in Israel.
That's his response to the cost of bacon? Okay, but perhaps the greatest contrast with his opponent, Vice President Harris, came in how he ended the day with a second televised town hall with Univision, where unlike his Fox Love Fest, he did take tough questions from Hispanic voters. But unlike Vice President Harris on Fox, he couldn't hold his own, highlighted by his response to a question about January 6th from a former Republican construction worker from Tampa, Florida.
I want to give you the opportunity to try to win back my vote. You know, what happened during January 6th and the fact that, you waited so long to take action while your supporters were attacking the Capitol. If you would answer these questions for me, I would really appreciate it and give you the opportunity. There's, your own vice president doesn't want to support you now.
Thank you, Ramiro.
So the people that don't support a very small portion, very importantly, you had hundreds of thousands of people come to Washington. They didn't come because of me. They came because of the election. They thought the election was a rigged election. Nothing done wrong at all. Nothing done wrong. And action was taken, strong action. Ashley Babbitt was killed. Nobody was killed. There were no guns down there. We didn't have guns. The others had guns, but we didn't have guns. That was a day of love from the standpoint of the millions. It's like hundreds of thousands.
Joining me now is Denver Riggleman, former Republican congressman who's no longer affiliated with the party. In Denver, I don't know if you could see the way that people were reacting as Donald Trump said it was a day of love. And people were going, what are you talking about? And he said no one was killed. And people were like, what are you talking about? It seems to me that what we're seeing is Trump confronting reality and not being used to it and not being able to handle it. What do you think?
I think his whole life has been doing the weave, trying to get away from it, from getting away from reality. I think, I'm sorry, Joy. I mean, that's what me and you do here. But I think he's either deliberately lying and radicalizing people the same that he did, before the election in 2020, or he's too stupid to know the difference between fact and fiction. I think both of those are equally dangerous to the American public. And I've said this before, I've had individuals come up to me and say, well, Denver, he just says a lot of stupid things, but he doesn't follow through with them. And I've heard that a lot, Joy. And I'm like, well, that's sort of ridiculous. I think he followed through with exactly what he told Billy Bush on that Access Hollywood bus. If you talk to E. Jean Carroll, if you talk about what he said about the election being stolen and how many times he mentioned violence or things of that nature before January 6th, it seemed like those individuals did exactly what he told them to do. So I think it's a little bit ludicrous to think that he does not believe what he says, which means that he is incredibly ignorant, or that he's radicalizing individuals to do the same kind of ridiculousness that we saw on January 6th and the stuff that we're seeing lately with the type of violence around the country that we have today.
Donald Trump has been canceling interviews left and right in the waning days of his campaign, but still found time to appear on a conservative podcast that was released earlier today, where he blamed Ukraine's president for his country getting invaded by Russia.
I think Zelensky's one of the greatest salesmen I've ever seen. Every time he comes in, we give him $100 billion. Who else got that kind of money in history? There's never been. And that doesn't mean I don't want to help him, because I feel very badly for those people. But he should never have let that war start. That war's a loser.
Michelle Goldberg is an opinion columnist at the New York Times. Her latest column is titled "America's on the Brink of a Great Political Realignment." It's already visible in Arizona. Faz Shakir served as the campaign manager for the 2020 Bernie Sanders campaign. He's now the co-founder and executive director of More Perfect Union, and they join me now. First of all, I'm just going to start with like a sort of somewhat superficial, but to me, legitimate thing. He sounds really weird, Donald Trump. He's got this Brando and Apocalypse Now thing going on with his voice. At all his things, the trains of thought have gotten shorter and shorter and shorter. They've gotten more digressive, and he's doing a lot of media, mostly with very friendly outlets like that podcast. But when you look at the answers, it is just nonsense.
Right. It's unintelligible.
It is unintelligible.
If you printed it in the newspaper just kind of verbatim, it would look like it was a random word generator. And I still think that the collective, we are underreacting to that bizarro kind of musical event that he did the other night. I mean, if Joe Biden had done anything remotely similar, if he'd done it for 5 minutes, never mind 40 minutes, swaying on a stage while playing music and saying nothing while everybody sort of pretended it was normal and looked around awkwardly and tried to figure out how to respond, the calls for Joe Biden to get out of the race, the calls for anyone else to get out of the race. I mean, our ability to understand or talk about what's normal is so out of whack. And obviously, Trump being senescent is pretty far down the list of kind of reasons why he shouldn't be president.
Right, exactly.
Yes. Nevertheless, there is something going on here.
Yes, I joked the other day, it's a little like the food is terrible and the portions are too small.
Right, I mean,
it's like,
the
like, do you really want him at his
best? One who kind of can't accomplish anything.
Faz, it's interesting to me. So there's always a sort of choice with Trump on what you're hitting him on. And it's interesting to me, two things. One, that they have been really going on the democracy stuff. Milley, the threats he's been making, January 6th, hammering that. At the same time, when you're looking at their ad spend, the ads they're running are very meat and potatoes. He's for billionaires. He's going to give billionaires a tax cut. We're going to look out for middle-class folks. And it seems to me like they're kind of covering both those lanes in different ways. What do you think?
I think you're right about the ad strategy. I want to see more of it as an appeal to working class people. I feel like when you look at the events that they have done, and they stand with Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney, and then you've got Mark Cuban today, and you've got efforts to speak to crypto, and you've got efforts to distance from Lena Khan. I'm like, that's all. I understand we got a big tent. We got to appeal to everybody. But don't forget, here's, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, AOC, working class people, Sean Fain. I think she's going to do an event with him tomorrow, I think, knock on wood. But I think don't lose that. We work best, right? Biden 2020 worked best when it's all of the above coalition. I think in a recent column, Michelle reminded us of the old quote of 2016, in which Democratic leaders were saying, hey, for every working class vote we lose out in Western PA, we'll gain 2 in suburban Philadelphia. That was wrong. And why is it wrong? Because when you're leaking from the working class bucket, that's a big bucket, Chris. You don't want to leak from that bucket. You want to fight for that bucket.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this realignment, which is look, everyone's swimming upstream of the realignment, okay? So the realignment's happening. And the Biden administration has done a ton to try to, and by realignment, I mean, non-college voters moving towards Republican MAGA-ism across racial and demographic lines, college-educated voters, women voters, particularly single women, particularly women with degrees and advanced degrees moving towards Democrats. The question of what do you do with that gravity, right? How do you, is the big question for both campaigns.
Right, you go to war with the coalition you have, not the coalition that you want.
Right.
And so I think that, Joe Biden had a theory of the case, which is that Democrats have lost have been bleeding working class support because of their economic policies, because of NAFTA, because of free trade, because of offshoring, all these things. And he is going to start kind of making the investments that a pro-worker Democratic Party needs to make, having the industrial policy that a pro-worker Democratic Party needs to make. And those things, I think, are correct, regardless of the political benefits. But the political benefits have been scant. And it could just be that it takes a much longer time to rebuild that kind of trust. But Kamala Harris doesn't have a much longer time, right? And so there really are a lot of there weren't enough disaffected Republicans to save Hillary Clinton in 2016, but there are a significant block of them out there. They're the reason that Arizona is now a state completely dominated by Democrats when it used to be a state completely dominated by Republicans, and where Democrats are still the 3rd smallest party in the state.
Do you think, Faz, a question about Trump, how much Trump is doing media and how much he's talking to media? There are different views on this, which is that one school is more attention to him, the better for him, because that's the thing that he feeds off of. The other is that the more attention to him, the worse for him, because people actually, when he's in their face, don't like him that much. He is doing a lot of sort of friendly media. He's canceled a whole bunch of interviews. Where are you on that, particularly down the stretch here? Because this is the key point.
I mean, I tend to believe that a majority of Americans are not for Trump. We had 81 million votes against him last time. I'd like to believe that will still remain the case. Will defeat him. I think they know that they've got a cap too. So for them, that the cost of being mocked by their critics is less, because it's baked in with their sense of they just need to mobilize a certain number of people who they've identified, and however he's going to continue to say whatever he's going to say is somehow going to try to mobilize that base, and that's all who they're talking to, and there's less persuasion for him. Whereas for Kamala Harris, my response to Michelle and some of that is that having gone through Michigan and Wisconsin, I think that the people are open to her. Even in union halls, they were not sold fully, and they're open to her, so the case for her is stronger, and that's why I don't want to see us lose on just talking to some of these folks. I feel like, even you and I have watched her try to distance herself from Biden. There's a way in which you do that successfully, I think. You say, hey, I wish that Joe Biden had gone harder at housing costs. As one of my first things I'm going to do, I'm going to go after this. I wish he had gone stronger on Social Security. I wish he had raised the minimum wage. That's a way in which you distance and do it in a way that appeals to some of these votes that we really need.
It is interesting how much housing has been central on the policy agenda. Although, again, I also at this point remain a little skeptical about how much policy matters. Truly, I would like it to, but I'm just not quite. It's not clear as an empirical matter.
Chris, it may not be policy, but it is a knowledge and understanding of I know your life. I know what you're going through. That does matter.
Michelle.
And I have an Israeli official in Tel Aviv messaging me now that the Foreign Minister Katz, has just confirmed that he is dead. I'm looking throughout the rest of my phone, but so far they're expecting a confirmation from the Prime Minister, but that may not come immediately. But we are told now, I am told, from an Israeli official that the foreign minister has said this. I've got it in Hebrew, and I'm looking at for the English translation in my phone, Peter. If this is in fact true, it's just an extraordinary development. This is the mastermind of October 7th. He is a Hamas leader who, according to Israeli and U.S. officials, has been the single biggest obstacle to a ceasefire. He is, according to senior Israeli officials, the person who jumped the gun on the terror plan against Israel from Iran, Hezbollah, the other proxies, and Hamas. And October 7th was a surprise to them. It was something that they had been working on, but Sinwar took it on himself. Here's a statement from the foreign minister. This is from Foreign Minister Israel Katz, just handed to me. It is a personal statement to dozens of foreign ministers worldwide. Quote, terrorist mastermind Yahya Sinwar, responsible for the massacre and atrocities of October 7th, was eliminated today by IDF soldiers. This is a great military and moral achievement for Israel and a victory for the entire free world against the axis of radical Islam led by Iran. The elimination of Sinwar creates an opportunity for the immediate release of the hostages and a potential change that would lead to a new reality in Gaza without Hamas and without Iranian control. Foreign Minister Katz added, Israel now needs your support and assistance more than ever to advance these crucial goals together. I should point out that the Israeli cabinet is a divided cabinet, politically divided, and there are right-wing members who are even more conservative, some would say radically conservative, one of whom was on a U.S. terror list in the past. And they were in disagreement with Defense Minister Gallant, with other members of the cabinet, with members who left the war cabinet, like Minister Gantz. So this is from one minister, but the cabinet was briefed earlier today, as we have been reporting, that it was likely Sinwar. The visual evidence seemed to support that. They were waiting for DNA, and I still have not seen. I'm going to look into my phone, Peter, but why don't you? And Richard Engel is joining us now. So, Peter, let me just bring Richard Engel in. Richard, that confirmation, and you had reported that officials were telling us for several hours that they believed it was Sinwar, based on visual evidence, based on what the troops still there were telling them. But they didn't have the DNA, and I'm not sure that they do yet. But this is the Foreign Minister Israel Katz, saying so.
So the foreign minister has just said that. I also have a senior U.S. military official saying to me, quote, it's definitely him. This official did not specify how the United States knew that, didn't mention if it was facial recognition or DNA, but expressed, well, as clear as could possibly be said, that Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind of the October 7th attacks, is dead. And the way he was killed, I think, is also very interesting. For months, U.S. and Israeli officials believed that Sinwar had been hiding in caves, hiding in tunnels underneath the cities and villages of the Gaza Strip, that he had at times gone off the grid. The only communications with him were through a handful of aides who had direct contact. He didn't use cell phones, similar to other leaders like the Hezbollah leader, but Israel found other ways to get to Hezbollah using more antiquated technology that they preferred, thinking it was more secure, like walkie-talkies and pagers. In this case, it seems that Yahya Sinwar was moving around, was in a building above ground, that he was with at least two other fighters. The images that I've seen, that you've seen, Andrea, that I believe we're not showing yet, they're very graphic, show someone who looks very much like Sinwar, dressed in a military-style uniform, a gun near him, shot. May have been other damage in a building that is completely destroyed. His body identifiable, but showing lots of many different casualties. So if that is him, and this is in fact confirmed, and the foreign minister says it is, this military official that I'm speaking to says that it is an enormous blow to Hamas. He is the leader of the organization. He'd been someone that has been on the run for months, and he had been, as you said, seen as an obstacle to reaching a ceasefire agreement, that he didn't want to do it. He thought expanding the war, now that the war is expanding to Lebanon, the war has already expanded to the Houthis in Yemen, would help Hamas, would help him personally, because it would take some of the pressure off of Gaza, because the Israeli military had to fight on so many different fronts, both in the front to the north in Lebanon and the Gaza front to the south. That clearly didn't slow Israel down. Israeli forces are still fighting in southern Lebanon, still carrying out airstrikes in Beirut and other places, and on the offensive right now all across the Gaza Strip. So it seems that that he was moving, that he was cornered, and that they finally closed in and killed him.
Of course, the initial fear was, what will be the response from his fellow terrorists, and will they take this out against the hostages? Some of them are clearly guarding the hostages. He was not.
Well, according to the Israelis, that they cornered him in this firefight. They did not know specifically that Sinwar was in the location. It was in an area of Gaza City, in an area that they call Tel Al Sultan. It's an area that is completely destroyed. I actually visited it relatively recently. I went in with the Israeli military, which is the only way that foreign journalists can get into Gaza. And in this area, it was the same location, and by the way, completely devastated, not a single building standing. The only sign of life that I saw were a few stray animals, and of course the Israeli soldiers who were with us. And the reason that the IDF took this group of reporters to this location in Tel Al Sultan was to show they had a tremendous amount of fighting there, to show the extent of the damage, and specifically to show the location where Hamas had held and then executed 6 hostages not long ago. And in this area, it was believed, according to U.S. intelligence and Israeli intelligence, that Sinwar had been seen in the past, or signs of his presence had been found in the past. So if, in fact, he wasn't killed in this area in some sort of military uniform, flanked by at least 2 other gunmen, himself carrying a gun, it would show a leader who was isolated geographically, left with a small group of people, these 2 or perhaps a few others, and on the run, not hiding out in a tunnel, as had been the intelligence assessment of many in the past.
And we should point out, he's a former prisoner, you know this so well, who had been released in a prisoner trade, but as a prisoner, he became very well versed in Israeli military tactics, intelligence tactics. He'd been interrogated, of course, and also had been able to communicate through messengers, because he would never use a cell phone. He knew well enough how he could be either tracked or blown up and executed through electronic devices.
And he knew the value of hostages. He knew the value of hostages as well, Andrea. He was in jail, as you mentioned, for many years in different Israeli detention facilities and prisons, and was very sick while he was in jail, was treated by Israelis who basically saved his life. But the only reason he was freed was with the kidnapping and then the prisoner exchange for an Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit. So he himself saw the power of taking hostages and how they could be used as leverage over Israeli society, use them to pressure the Israeli government. And now, well, what that means for the hostages after this is an open question. Will the kidnappers then use this as an opportunity to carry out some sort of vengeance on the defenseless hostages, or will they now see them as even more valuable, potentially more valuable bargaining chips? But there is also another way of looking at this, Andrea. The Gaza Strip is so devastated right now. It could be that the actual leadership of Yahya Sinwar is not necessarily as important as it might be in organizations that are more intact. There's so much damage in Gaza. There's so much anger. There's so much frustration there after a year of devastation that perhaps another person steps in. We will see.
Richard, I now have a confirmation from an Israeli source, an Israeli official, that the fingerprint of the body matches Sinwar's fingerprint, which is in the IDF file from when he was a prisoner. Now, that is a very trustworthy Israeli official texting me this just now.
This is Ryan Sanders. He's a resident of Erie County, Pennsylvania, a proud member of the Sheet Metal Workers Union and president of the local arm of the AFL-CIO. He is also a swing voter. Sanders was profiled by the Philadelphia Inquirer today and says that while Kamala Harris is a better friend to Labor than Trump, he still doesn't feel like he really knows her or what she plans to do as president. Sanders says he'll probably make up his mind in the voting booth. Now, that echoes what I heard when I spoke to union members in Saginaw, Michigan, just last month.
I'm undecided because I just haven't seen enough of it yet. I need to pay closer attention and kind of do more independent research before I make my judgment.
The lukewarm feelings from rank-and-file union members are part of the problem that Democrats are facing right now in a race that could not be tighter. As Vox reports today, it remains the case that under Biden, Democrats have seen their poll numbers with union voters decline at the presidential level, even as the administration's support for organized labor's interests has increased. Joining me now to unpack all of this is Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. Senator Sanders, thank you so much for being here and helping me understand this phenomenon. I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that Kamala Harris right now is on track to do worse among union households than Hillary Clinton did in 2016. And even Joe Biden, I believe, NBC News found Biden winning only 50% of voters from union households. Do you have a theory on why that support isn't stronger given everything that the Biden-Harris administration has done for unions?
Well, I think at a time, Alex, of massive income and wealth inequality, at a time when 60% of our people are living paycheck to paycheck, at a time when we have a broken and very expensive healthcare system, time when we're the only major country not to provide medical and family leave, at a time when we have more income and wealth inequality than we've ever had. I think Democrats have not been strong enough in standing up and saying, look, we got a rigged economy. The rich are becoming much richer. You got 3 people owning more wealth than the bottom half, while working people are struggling. And we Democrats, we're going to stand with the working people. And we're going to do the things that need to be done to improve lives for millions of people. What does that mean? It means raising the minimum wage to a living wage. And it's hard for me to understand why Kamala has not come out on that issue. It's important to point out how terrible Trump's labor record was. And is. This is a guy you may recall did a call with Elon Musk, and they were laughing about how it might be a good idea to fire workers who went on strike. This is Trump giving a speech and saying, as a private businessman, I hated to pay overtime. Millions of people's lives depend on time and a half for overtime. Trump boasts how he didn't want to pay overtime. He appointed an extremely right-wing anti-labor Secretary of Labor. We got to make that clear. But equally important, it is no great secret that for many, many years, Biden being the exception, by the way, Biden has been very, very strong on labor issues. But we have got to make it clear, and I speak as an independent who caucuses with the Democrats, which side we are on. And the side we are on has got to be taking on big money, standing up for working families.
And I hear what you say about the working class writ large, but the reality is that Joe Biden saved the Teamsters Pension Fund to the tune of $36 billion, which amounts to roughly $100,000 per pension. This is a man who walked the picket line in a way that no other American president in modern history has done. Joe Biden was still only getting 50% of union support. And it sort of begs the question, is it something else? Is it actually independent of Joe Biden's record? I'm going to just take Harris out of the equation here, given, Joe Biden was only getting 50% of their support. Is it education polarization?
Quite sure about that,
go ahead.
The polling that I have seen suggested that Kamala is not doing as well as Biden did. And I think among working class people, there was a lot of support for Biden. Not as much as I would like to see, but there was support because he has the strongest pro-labor record of any president since Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
I wonder, you talk about the contrast in these 2 tickets, right? All of the things Trump has said, Trump's record. And then you have the filings from this month about who is supporting Trump's candidacy. It's a group of billionaires. It's Dick Uihlein, who contributed nearly $50 million to a Trump supporting super PAC. Timothy Mellon, railroad magnate, $50 million. Elon Musk, we've talked about. Miriam Adelson, $95 million. How can there even be an argument that this campaign is not in the pocket of the ultra rich? I mean, they're literally funneling hundreds of millions of dollars.
The argument is, look, I can understand it. You're quite right. But, you know, for example, it would be appropriate to my mind for Kamala Harris to make that very point, that increasingly in America we have a political system. And by the way, yes, you're right. A small number of Republican billionaires are putting unbelievable amounts of money, but Democratic billionaires are funding the Democratic Party as well. And what we need is somebody to say, you know what, we cannot have an economy and a political system dominated by billionaires. And you know what I think? I think a lot of Republicans would say that's right, independents. Democrats would say that that's right. But I think most importantly, people are hurting. And they need to know that somebody is standing up and fighting for them. They're not stupid. They see the people on top doing phenomenally well. They see an enormous, unprecedented level of corporate greed. Who is standing up and fighting for them? And I think Kamala has got to be strong. Look, she's brought forth a number of very good ideas. Housing crisis. She wants to build 3 million units. Very important. Child expanding and extending the child tax credit so we deal with the horrific level of childhood poverty in America. Enormously important. Supporting the PRO Act. Enormously important. Expanding Medicare to cover home health care. Wow, that's a big, big deal. Hearing and vision. Enormously important. But you got to emotionally, not just bring forth those good ideas. You got to say, you know what? I am prepared to take on the big money interest. I am on your side. The next time there's a strike, like Joe Biden, I will be there on the picket line. I understand that you can't afford health care. I will be there. We are going to join the rest of the industrialized world. Maybe not tomorrow, but we will, to guarantee health care to every man, woman, and child. But emotionally, I think working class people have got to say, hey, see that lady there? She's on my side. She's got my vote. Trump is out there. He has his enemies. You know, he is going after undocumented people. They are the cause of every problem in the history of America. Well, what is our explanation as to why 60% of people are struggling economically and living paycheck to paycheck? And we have to identify corporate greed and the massive level of income and wealth inequality we now see. Kamala does that. I think she's going to win a whole lot more working class people.
Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, thank you for your time, sir. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And to all the women, and especially the young women, who put their faith in this campaign and in me, I want you to know that nothing has made me prouder than to be your champion. I know we have still not shattered that highest and hardest glass ceiling, but someday someone will, and hopefully sooner than we might think right now.
That was Hillary Clinton conceding the election, by the way, during her concession speech in 2016. The morning after losing to Donald Trump, urging women to not lose hope, and they did not. Following Clinton's loss, a record number of women got involved in politics at the local and state level. Flash forward 8 years later, and several of those same women are poised to take the national stage this election cycle. As Forbes Women reports, among the most likely newcomers to Congress in January are women first spurred to candidacy by the outcome of the 2016 election, now with years of service in the state legislature. Here to discuss this, the vice chair of Forbes and Know Your Values 3050 Summit, Huma Abedin, and editor at Forbes Women, Maggie McGrath. Great to have you both with me. Maggie, what did your team at Forbes Women discover?
Well, Mika, the big takeaway here is that the so-called pink wave that happened after 2016 was not a momentary phenomenon. It has had a lasting effect on American politics. Kelly Dittmar is the director of research at Rutgers Center for American Women in Politics, and she's also a Forbes Women contributor. And she writes for us that of the 15 women who are best positioned to pick up U.S. House seats in November, 8 were first elected to office after 2016, and 5 entered became state legislators in 2018 alone. It's worth noting that this effect is more pronounced among Democrats than Republicans. In fact, women are almost at parity with men among Democratic House nominees. They're almost 46% of the nominee pool, in large part because they were more successful in their primary races. Now, of course, those are the numbers. Some examples of the women who were inspired to run in 2016 and have state office include Maryland State Senator Sarah Elfreth. In 2018, she made Maryland state history when she was elected to the state Senate. Today, she is favored to win Maryland's 3rd congressional district. Over in Minnesota's 3rd congressional district is a similar story. Kelly Morrison spent most of her career as a practicing OBGYN, but after Trump was elected in 2016, she realized she wanted to have a voice in politics. She was elected to the Minnesota State House in 2018, State Senate in 2022, and today she's favored to win her House district in Minnesota. So I think the conclusion here is that while 2016 brought a loss for women at the top of the ticket, that moment has been a catalyst that has powered down ballot races in the years since.
And Huma, watching Hillary Clinton, I mean, you were there, you were deep in it through it all. It was deeply personal and very painful, but you also witnessed firsthand how the former Secretary of State built a pipeline for women to seek higher office. Can you tell us more about the women Maggie mentioned, but also how the dynamics since 2016 have been so motivating to more women like that to run?
Well, Mika, there are 3 big takeaways I have, both from this research and the conversations we have at Know Your Value all the time. The first being pipeline is the key word. It was one of the things that drove Hillary for decades, building that pipeline, doing the work, having the experience. And you know, there's that age-old adage that seeing something makes you believe it's possible. And added to that, you know, to have the loss, to then shift to the surge, which was real. We saw it in 2018. You've heard about the 2 candidates who Maggie just mentioned. I remember 2 women who were colleagues on the campaign, Sarah Jacobs, who now serves as a House member from California, and Haley Stevens, who serves in Michigan. They had the experience, knew what it took to be in office. And the third piece, which in some ways I think is even more important, is experience. It's one thing to have the threats, the urgency, the fear, the anger of seeing your country taken away from your policies that are dangerous for your family or your future, and to sort of jump in the race at the state level. And I think a lot of these women in 2018 did that and are now poised to go to Washington with that experience and be able to both write and have successful legislation on the federal level.
And I'm curious, Huma, what you've seen on the so-called Trump effect since 2016 in terms of Republican women seeking office.
Well, it didn't seem to have as much effect in the post-2016 and the midterms in 2018, but post-2020, when Trump lost, you saw a very similar surge and maybe surge is a little bit of an exaggeration, but certainly an impetus for women on the Republican side to decide to run for office. So Sherry Biggs, for example, who is poised to win in South Carolina in a few weeks, served in the Air Force, has a background as a nurse practitioner, and she's citing the need to return power to the people as her reason to run. You have women who ran from Illinois, from Tennessee, from Florida since 2020, all of whom have sought the reasoning behind bringing, America back, or the border is too porous, and so using a lot of the agenda on the Republican side to say this is the reason they need to run. And so the summary basically is it's great that all these women are running. They have the experience. It's great if they're making history, but more than that, it's great that they're running.
And Maggie, before we go, we have an announcement about Forbes and Know Your Value's 4th annual 50 over 50 global list. Can you tell us more about that?
I absolutely can. I am so excited to announce that nominations are open for the 4th annual 50 over 50 global list, and it is different this year. So we in the past have done regional lists, 50 over 50 Asia, 50 over 50 EMEA. This year is one truly global list. We're simplifying it. One list, 50 people from around the world, think every country other than the U.S. So we are looking for women in Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia, South America, Central America, Canada. As ever, you have to be over the age of 50 to make this list. What that means is this year you have to be born in 1973 or earlier. So if you have a birth date ending in 74 or later, you are too young. You have until December 1st. I know it's a great phrase. If you're born after 1974, you're too young. But you have until December 1st to go to Forbes.com to nominate someone you admire or to nominate yourself. And we have full nominations criteria on that page on Forbes.com.
No lying up. We'll catch it. Huma Abedin and Maggie McGrath, thank you both very much. And you can get all the details about our 50 over 50 global nominations and the 50 over 50 list in general, and submit an application today at Forbes.com and KnowYourValue.com. We have a big event coming up in just about a week that we can't wait to tell you about.